Welcome to the IonaHoops.com podcast with your host, Guy Flatico.
Iona's first game is less than a month away, so you can pretty much consider this podcast in season from here on through March. It's season 2, episode 6, the IonaHoops.com podcast. We've got a packed episode. We're going to take a look at exclusive video from last night's Meets the Gaels scrimmage, and then we're going to follow that by welcoming in Mike Randle, who covers college hoops of the Action Network and is the host of the Screen to Screener podcast. Hopefully you all know that last one, since I've appeared on it twice as a guest. Anyway, Mike has done some previews of other MAC teams as well, in addition to the Gaels. And we're going to get his take on the MAC, as well as tap into a couple other areas of his expertise that you guys might find interesting. But hey, it's Iona's time.
Ionas.
So one of the drawbacks for me in switching to a video format for this podcast is that it's not as easy to pivot when news is breaking. Yes, a segment of the last episode of my podcast was out of date pretty much the minute it hit the internet, as Sadiko Ayo committed to Iona almost exactly at the same time the podcast dropped. I mean, at least I'm thankful I took the time to, talk about Ayo's visit and even added some video courtesy of the great guys at Hoop Dreams NYC. But yeah, the timing wasn't good. Not much I can do about it. And I mean, yeah, if that news breaks even an hour earlier, I could have inserted a quick little video clip just saying, hey, he just committed, by the way. But the submit button had already been hit. Or for all you old guys out there who might better appreciate this analogy, the film was already in the can. Alas. Yes, the good news is, though, Sadiko Ayo is a Gael. And that's the most important thing. The kid is uber athletic. It just feels like Barrick Jean-Louis' heir apparent to me in some way. Well, hopefully that's how great he turns out to be. Great get by the Iona staff, as this kid had several high major offers, including one as recently as August from Pittsburgh. Welcome, Sadiko, and hopefully we'll have you guys updated before news breaks next time.
Ionas.
The MAC preseason award show is this coming Tuesday night at 7 p.m. airing in an ESPN3. Will the Iona men be unanimous selection to finish first? Will any Gaels be preseason first team all MAC? And how about the women's team? We haven't even talked about them. Where will the MAC coaches pick them when you consider they're bringing almost their entire rotation back from last season? Tune in Tuesday night at 7 on ESPN3 to find out.
Ionas.
We've got more MAC Hoops news. The league has received an NCAA waiver to allow MAC men's and women's basketball teams to transmit live video to the bench area for coaching purposes for all 2021-22 regular season conference games and conference tournament games. Now, the NCAA already permits women's basketball to use preloaded video on the bench, and the MAC men's teams will now experiment with this format as well this season. Also, there's no truth to the rumor that Richardson has allowed viewing of the IonaHoops.com podcast on the benches. Let's move to off a roundup.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
We're going to start off with an update that 4-star Greg Glenn, who Iona made the final cut for, opted for Michigan in the least shocking recruiting news in recent memory. Glenn was a Michigan lean for a really long time. And I honestly was stunned he didn't commit while on his official visit to Ann Arbor a couple weeks back. Of course, Iona's staff was not shocked by this either, thus Sadiko Ayo being added. And he plays the same position as Glenn. Another player who once had Iona in his final list before reopening his recruitment a few weeks back was Will Richardson. He just committed to Fordham. Good luck to him there. Also, in a recent communication to Iona fans, Coach Rick Pitino noted that the Gaels will likely have only one early signing, assuming he's referring to Ayo, and that the Gaels will keep an eye on for other recruiting needs. A quick unofficial look at the roster suggests that Iona will need to fill about 5 roster spots in total. I don't know. I can't keep track. But we're not done just yet on the roundup. Hope you haven't had enough of our Savior Lutheran players with Iona's landing of Io, because Iona's offered a pair of 2023 Our Savior Lutheran players from the program. One is Jameer Tripp, a 6'6" guard forward, 3-star recruit ranked by Rivals as the 148th best player in the class. And he's got offers from Nebraska, LSU, Penn State, UMass, St. Louis, and others. Iona's also offered 6'5" guard Christian Jones, who has offers from Providence and Stony Brook. Another interesting morsel about Jones from the Small World department. I coached him in Pop Warner when he was 8 years old. I mean, how's that for a strange connection? Hope to see you again, Christian. All right, let's get to it. Last night's Meet the Gaels scrimmage. Earlier this week, I was asked offline what I was most interested in seeing at last night's Maroon and Gold scrimmage. And I said, who dressed and who doesn't? I was right. 5 Gaels did not dress for the scrimmage. And before we get into the highlights, I'll give you where everyone reportedly stands. We're going to go from worst condition to the day to the day-to-day guys. And we're going to start Osborne Shima. This poor kid just hasn't been able to stay on the floor. And when Coach Pitino addressed the fans in attendance last night, he hinted it might be a couple of months until we see the 7-footer out there. So we're going to have to just wait and see how that goes. I feel really bad for the kid. We then go to Colton Cashaw, who Pitino said is out with a leg injury for 4 to 6 weeks, which means he'd be out until either just before the 5-game swing in Orlando or just after it. The good news is those are the only 2 Gaels not expected to be ready for opening night, November 9th against Appalachian State. The other injuries, I talked to Dylan Van Eyck before the scrimmage, and as reported on the Iona message board first, Dylan's indeed in a boot, and he's confirmed to me that he would be out no more than a couple of weeks, just very precautionary that he's wearing the boot. Not lastly, but we also know that Berg Jean-Louis was injured in Greece, and the injuries kind of held him out of action for the most part for quite some time. He has been just very recently cleared to return, but he did not dress last night. So we're just going to assume he's going to resume practicing in the next day or two, really. Another surprise, Quinn Slazinski did not dress last night. Dylan Van Eyck also told me before the scrimmage that Quinn took a shot to the head in a recent practice. So he didn't dress simply for precautionary reasons. They didn't anticipate any real issue there. He's not expected to miss any practice time. So doing the math, that's 5 guys, which leaves 10 scholarship players for last night's festivities. And due to the reduced numbers, the Gaels scrimmaged for only a half rather than a full game, which is where the format changed. Earlier we knew it was supposed to be a Meet the Gaels scrimmage. It became kind of a half open practice open scrimmage because of the numbers issue. So it wasn't like a full game scrimmage like we saw in the Bon Voyage scrimmage in August. But despite those injuries and despite only having half a scrimmage, it was still a whole lot of fun. Let's take a look at the highlights. So here's the opening tip. Basically, this was a 5-on-5 with walk-on Carey getting some spot duty as well. The gold team had Joyner, Myers, James, Duwash, and Brown, while the maroon team had Tyson, Nelly, Wilde, Clayton, and Parker. Emphasis on the offensive end throughout the scrimmage was ball movement, player movement, while using a 24-second shot clock. And you can see good things happening throughout because of that as Joyner opens the scoring with a 3. Yeah, no shock here. Nelly was doing Nelly things, such as his sweet turnaround on the N1. And Parker Weiss was doing Parker Weiss things as well, which means making threes. He really is a heady player. He's going to see a lot of minutes for this season because of the way he plays. Elijah Joyner, I thought, was the best player on the floor. He really gets guys involved and also created his own shot quite a bit over the course of the day, such as a step-back 3. Walter Clayton, I thought, played well on both ends, I thought, too. More aggressive on offense here. He is driving to the bucket for a layup. He also may have had the overall highlight of the day in the 3-on-3 scrimmage earlier where he dunked on Trey James. Here's a guy who was also really good last night, Robert Brown Jr. Great to see him back out there. More on him later. And speaking of a guy who's great to see back in form, Tyson Jolly was also really strong last night. He didn't shoot many threes, but he was super effective inside, backing down opponents with strength, moves like this one. So we're a minute and a half or so into highlights, and we haven't seen it yet. And you know it's going to come, that means. It means Ryan Myers is going to shoot 3. During the evening, Pitino joked that Myers had some sort of religious belief that kept him from passing the basketball. Anyway, here's Jolly one more time, driving to the basket for 2. And how about this effort from Josh Duwash? What a save that results in another Joyner 3. See that a lot today. And on the other end, this is what Parker brings. Bang. Now this is the Tyson Jolly we are hoping to see. Booyah. Man, if Jolly's doing this sort of stuff, look out. It's going to be a fun year. And so here's Parker Weiss in a nutshell. First he deflects the pass, starts the break the other way. Jordan Wilde handling, feeds it to Parker, who then, of course, finds Nelly for the dunk. I mean, Nelly's ability to run the floor, by the way, is often overlooked, and it's something I feel the Gaels can exploit this year, especially given the up-tempo style. So, like I said earlier, Iona's going to play quickly, but when in the half court, you're going to see a lot of Euro-style movement implemented, free-flowing, players moving without the ball, everyone touching it. Here's some good ball movement leading to an open look from 3 from Joyner that doesn't go down, but Brown's going to hit the glass, and he's going to feed, guess who? Ryan Myers for 3. Guess what Myers doesn't do? He doesn't miss. How do you not play Myers? He starts for every other MAC program. It's ridiculous. Coming down the other end, Jolly had several assists last night, and here's one where he's going to feed Wilde for the easy lay-in. More Jolly here with tough turnaround finish inside. Kid just plays bigger than he is. This is the Jolly we were all waiting to see for sure. Coming up here, we're going to see some good ball movement again. And you're going to see again another name that you're going to hear me mention a few more times in this video, and that's Robert Brown. With Shima's ongoing health issues, having Brown back, as I mentioned, Iona did not have last year. He's a strong post presence after Nelly that Iona just did not have, and it hurt us last year. And wow, what a difference it's going to make this year. Oh, and this is just another Weiss to Nelly combo after a turnover. Again, Nelly running like a gazelle in the friggin' Serengeti down the floor. Getting back to Brown, really an Iona weakness last year is that paint presence when Nelly would go to the bench. With Brown, this is just not a problem this season. The kid is just very effective, big, strong moves like that one inside. So I mentioned Tyson Jolly being himself, haven't I? Because he's back to being himself. Get used to seeing him out-muscle people for points like this all season. Man, what a backcourt with Jolly and Joyner, and then Myers too. Just, wow. Then, by the way, you can also throw in this other guy who's an afterthought for most teams, Parker Weiss. Bang. Who's the guy we're going to turn to when the shot clock winds down? How about Myers? You got to be kidding me. A rushed fading to the left jumper with Wilde in his face. And then here's Joyner with a quick 3 off an inbounds. Joyner's just so dynamic, very good, and perfect complement to this guy, Tyson Jolly, who's dynamic in other ways. And when they don't finish, Nelly cleans up. Earlier this week on the Iona board, there was debate regarding how many points points per game Iona is going to average. Honestly, I'm not even worried about the scoring average. You're going to be efficient offensively, and that's more important in my mind. And I'm not worried about threes either. Joyner right on cue. This team's going to have a better assist-to-turnover ratio compared to last year's team. Again, I expect him to be more efficient overall on offense. Even Nelly is more sure of himself with the ball than a year ago. Here's some good ball movement again, swinging around the arc to the open shooter. And that is Parker. Bang. It's going to be an afterthought this year for so many scouting reports. Here's the thing about this team. They have their alphas in Nelly, Joyner, and Jolly, complementary weapons like Myers and Barrick and Quinn and Dillon. But they also have guys who just know their roles and do their jobs. And I don't just mean the freshmen, who usually defer to veterans anyway. I mean guys like Colton and Brown, just great role players. And you can, of course, add this guy, Parker Weiss, to that as well. And here he is feeding Nelly one more time. So what I mean is this team has its stars, it has the role players, and it has the Froshes. The Frosh are going to show flashes. And all that adds up to making a deep team that's capable of some special things. It's going to be really fun to watch to see how it all plays out against the tough non-conference slate. Here's Myers coming up again one more time from deep because, you haven't seen it in a few minutes, so I wanted to make sure you had one more. What a weapon that kid's become. And here's a good example of what Elijah Joyner brings. He makes the block on Parker driving to the hoop, and he has the wherewithal to keep the ball in bounds. And then, no big deal. He'll just take it coast to coast for the layup at the other end. Just a tremendous talent. And I mentioned those freshmen. Here's Josh Duwash from 3. Another nice player just scratching the surface of what he's going to become this year. and over his career. And one more time, Brown with a strong inside move for the end one against Nelly. I tell you, Brown was a huge missing piece last year. Let's finish off with a flourish. Tyson Jolly with a penetration and lob to Nelly. Mike Randle covers college basketball for the Action Network, and he's the co-host of the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast. I'm hoping you guys know that one. I've been a guest on it a couple of times, and I've shared it relentlessly with you guys when I've appeared. So I hope you know his face and his voice by now. Mike also has expertise in sports wagering and fantasy football. He's been a great follow from me during this NFL season as my fantasy team consistently floats around mid-pack every year in the leagues that I'm in. Welcome to the program, Mike.
Guy, it's great to be here. I mean, your work is second to none for me. It's a pleasure to be on your pod. You've always killed it on ours. I just sit back and relax. Hopefully I can give you some nuggets and give you some laughs along the way. This is great. Thanks. Oh,
great to have you on. Before we get into all that good stuff, take a couple of minutes and tell everyone about the Action Network and the podcast and anything else you want to cover. I know you've got your hands in a lot of places.
Sure. College hoops is our passion. My best friend, Gus Kearns, and I have been starting this podcast now, I think about 5 years. And we always take on every year doing previews because of COVID last year. It was cut short. So we've aggressively gone at it this year. The Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast, available wherever you listen to your podcast. We also have my YouTube channel, Randle Rand Sports. You can look that up, and we put some videos up. We had your beautiful face up there talking about Iona as well. So, we really get into college sports. We love it. Action Network has been fantastic. I'm covering fantasy football and NFL wagering and college basketball wagering for them, and been doing so for quite some time. So it's college hoops for me. I love the NFL and fantasy football also, but nothing is better that we finally have fans in the stands here, and we're going to kick off a full season that hopefully will not be interrupted.
Oh, I totally agree with you there, man. That's crucial this year. And so, of course, mostly Iona fans listening, you know a thing or two about New Rochelle, don't you?
I do. My wife and I lived in New Rochelle for several years when we met. That was sort of the halfway point for us. Love the area. I mean, we used to go to Mariano Rivera Steakhouse all the time. We used to attend Iona games. It was fantastic walking down there, going back to the Scott Machado years, that sort of stuff when Tim Clues was there. I mean, all great things. So love the New Rochelle area. Love the people. Iona is a fantastic college and is, obviously with Pitino now, the success has just continued and is looking to be amplified. But yeah, New Rochelle is near and dear to our hearts. Absolutely.
And I know you've been cranking out college basketball preview episodes on your podcasts. How many have you done so far?
We're closing in on 100. We have a lot in the hopper. We tried to go around. It's hard, Guy, because, you contact people. We had several coaches, head coaches, and assistant coach came on as well. But usually we're looking for the beat reporters or the experts who can give us the insight because we covered it nationally. So there's going to be ins and outs. I mean, when you gave us all the stuff on Iona, I mean, I was just writing it down on a pen. Like you're going, okay, I got to get more information on this guy and things like the greatness of Nelly Jr. Joseph, which we'll get into, and all the great stuff. That's the little tidbits that we need. So we're putting that together. We tried to get all of them. Some people have responded. Some have given us, Gary Parrish just gave us some nice thoughts on Memphis recently. So we're getting there, but it's been a labor of love for sure. But it's getting us excited, getting us ready for the season.
Well, I know I gave you a lot of Iona insight, and like you said, it caused you to do some digging and come up with some of your own thoughts. So let's switch gears and talk about the MAC. Obviously, Iona fans are just giddy waiting for the season to start. We're pumped up. Every preview's got us picked first. The league coaches poll is going to come out in a few days. That I'm sure that'll be first. And the question is whether it'll be unanimous pick or not. Mm-hmm. What are your impressions of the MAC so far based on the previews and the research you've done? Where Iona is going to fall into things? I mean, are you in agreement with the consensus nationally? And how good can Iona really be in your mind?
Iona can be a major, major issue. They are a team that I do expect to win the conference, that I think is going to be the dominant program in the conference. And I also think, Guy, that last year, they showed a lot in that NCAA tournament game. They played Alabama. I loved Iona. I just thought it was a bad matchup for them because I thought the style they were going to play was going to be similar to what Alabama can do. They gave them all they can handle. They really do. So I think for Iona, I mean, is it a Sweet 16? Is that something that I think would be? I think it's reasonable. I think it's something they can reach that would be great for them. I do not doubt Rick Pitino in a tournament setting. And what I like that he's done that we talked about is he's brought players in that really fit the style. Not only do you have great players there, recruits as well, but you're talking about Tyson Jolly and Elijah Joyner. These are athletic, intense guys who are going to play defense, who are going to get up and down the floor and be an extension of what he wants. I think that this year, all of the coaches that we've talked to and the beat reporters have stressed the importance of being able to meld talent together and put it in a group where everyone is happy. Pitino does that every single year. This is no different for him. Other coaches having freshmen who they promise time to, with transfers coming in who are going to expect to play, that's a big challenge. I think like Bill Self in Kansas, I mean, they're loaded, but the guy, that's going to be a challenge. He's got 5-star recruits coming in, yet he has Remy Martin coming in, who is the preseason player of the year in the conference.
Right.
So I think Pitino is best equipped of almost any other coach to handle the expectations of Iona. He plays a deep bench. He has veterans there who are coming back. He has transfers coming in who expect to play right away, and he's got freshmen. He is going to be able to do that, and that's what makes Iona so dangerous. I almost feel like they have no weakness.
That's going to upset some of our friends up north, particularly our Siena fans that listen to this program that Iona fans love to go back and forth with. And you got a chance to talk to Coach Carm and preview Siena. So how about some thoughts on that?
You know, Coach Carm does a great job with Siena. He really has a culture there, and he is a big personality, and his team has taken on that persona. Them winning the regular season was a huge accomplishment because they really did suffer a lot of COVID challenges, which he talked about. But he is relishing, I think. The feeling I got from him is they have lost a lot, and people may not be expecting them to do much. And I think I'm seeing them picked middle of the pack a lot of times in the conference. He expects, from what I'm gathering, for them to be a major issue come the end of the season. And yes, I think in many ways they are trying to bring the role that Iona had last year to their program, whereas they went into the tournament top seed, expected to get that automatic bid, and then Iona comes in with that strong second half and beats them. I think Siena is now going to be the hunter, and Iona is going to be the hunted. And I think he does have that personality and ability to get Siena as a dangerous, dangerous team late in the year. So I think it's fascinating because it's different than having Siena and Iona battling at the top as they always do. Monmouth, of course, St. Peter's getting better. But I think that I think Siena is going to get off to a slow start, and then they're going to be dangerous at the end of the year. And I think he's looking forward to being that underdog role.
Well, you jumped on my next question for you. The MAC race is amazing this year. It's like Iona, and then there's 9 or 10 teams really that could be anywhere from second or third, or if things fall the wrong way, they could be 10th. I mean, it's the MAC is really, really balanced. And you mentioned St. Peter's and Monmouth. Anybody else you want to mention that you think could be making some noise before the year's out?
Yeah, I think that St. Peter's is the one that I'm keeping my eye on, only because they really struggled last year. They did not have a season anywhere near at any point that they thought they were going to. They were interrupted by COVID. Shaheen Holloway had trouble getting the team to any sort of consistency. But remember, they had a style that I think is unique in the MAC that can really cause problems for teams like Iona and Monmouth and Siena, where he wants to slow it down with Udefo inside, play defense, rebound, and they got away from that. The way that you're going to beat St. Peter's is by getting up on them and making them change what they like to do. But if we're slowing it down in the half court, grinding and battling, and let's say Iona's getting up and down the floor, missing shots, getting frustrated, that's where they thrive. I expect a much better St. Peter's team this year than you saw last year. So for me, that's the group at the top. King Rice with Monmouth, fantastic job. Almost went to North Carolina, decided to stay. Iona, Siena, St. Peter's. And the league as a whole is tough. I mean, Quinnipiac is going to cause problems as well. But overall, in the end, I think it's those four that still are separate from the rest of the conference.
Okay. So there are a few of us out here who enjoy placing the occasional wager or two in college hoops. Literally 20 years ago, I was writing for Rivals, and I did an interview with a guy who was an odds maker for one of the casinos. And it was one of the most insightful interviews I've ever been a part of in terms of finding out just the amount of money that was in play for a Canisius St. Peter's game on a Wednesday night, and how lines were generated for lesser known events, such as a MAC basketball game that has little interest. I mean, anyone can come up with a really good line for Duke, North Carolina, but how many folks specifically, especially back then, could come up with a line for Canisius St. Peter's? Tell us how the internet has changed all of that, though, and how online gambling has changed the game, even for stuff that seemingly no one would care about, like a MAC game.
It's really changed the landscape of sports in general, but specifically college basketball. Guy, you and I are college hoops junkies, so we don't care. We'll watch any game, anytime, December, January. But what college hoops has tried to do is mimic what the NFL has done with the combine and the off season. College basketball in the regular season is incredibly exciting. You go down to a Monmouth Iona game on Friday night in New Rochelle. The place is hopping and it's completely a fun atmosphere. My family's loved it, but that's not known nationally. So yes, television has brought that out of where it's a niche in the area, but sports wagering has changed it because people are just not going to get as involved in a daily 20, 25 game regular season because they don't feel that there's anything to it. Now they do. Gambling has changed that. And it's been a huge advantage for people who know conferences. The biggest advice I give to people who want to get into sports betting is pick a conference that you know. That's the best mark. People say, we'll ask professionals all the time, and that's what they'll say. Don't try to gamble on a million games. Watch a conference, know a conference, and then you will know when that line is set, whether it's off. The other part too is that the lines are set 24 hours in advance. So whereas the NFL will set a line and they'll have a time to change and modify it throughout the week, you don't have that in college basketball. So particularly early in the season, I think the devout college hoops fans, that specifically those in the smaller conferences, have the biggest advantage. By the time you get to the end of the year, those lines are going to be very, very certain.
So because there's so much information out there now, is it kind of like a double-edged sword? Because bettors have more information than they ever had before as well, not just the people who are actually making the bets. So the odds makers have that information and the bettors have that information. Who comes out ahead on that?
It's a great question. And I have the answer here is that I think most people, because of the internet and instant gratification, they want the shortcut. They want to know what's the secret. So before we had all this information, it was just going by your own feeling. Now you can find out, Guy, where the money is being bet on the Iona Siena game, where the percentage of bets are versus the percentage of money. And if the percentage of bets is high, that represents the public. If the percentage of money is high, that represents the sharps, the people who gamble with more money. So you can find those differences. But I think the pendulum is swung in the other way too much. So people will see something like that and say, oh, I'm just going to follow the money. I'm not going to follow the bets. Well, that's not true. And we even saw that in the NFL recently on Sunday. So if you see a big discrepancy between the money and the bets, for the casinos to win, they just have to win 53, 54% of the time. They don't have to win 70% of the time. So people realize in those casino games, it's not like the house advantage is 10%. Right. It's small. So I think people will see that now and they'll just follow the money. And that's not how it works at all. You can lose just as much betting with that strategy as you can against it. I think it's nuance. You may see 4 MAC games and see that the money is off with the bets with the public versus the sharps and 4 of them. Well, maybe it's 2-2, or maybe it's 3-1, but you have to make sure that you pick the right one. So that's where I think people, now that they have this information, they still want to know, okay, I'll just look up, I'll see where the money's going, and I'll just follow that because that means the casino wins. Well, the casino wins at a 53% rate. So you may not exactly have picked the right games. I think that's the reaction is now it's too much information, but it's still hard. It's still a difficult process to win at gambling.
So like 20 years ago when the internet was much smaller, my system was that I would generate my own lines. And back then, again, not every casino or betting house had MAC games. Only very few did because there was a limited interest. And it was easy for me then because if I was like, where did that number come from? That's ridiculous. That's the one I'm betting because I figure I got it as much as the odds makers. That doesn't happen as much for me anymore now because it's like Yeah, I figured that would be about 4.5. It just,
Yep.
the numbers come out what I think because that information is the same. So how do you bet on a Mac game now, even if you're a Mac fan?
Yeah, there's, but what's interesting is because the conference, there still are opportunities. The one game that jumped out to me from a while ago was I remember when Baylor was undefeated. They were like 8 or 9-0, and they were playing at West Virginia. And West Virginia was favored by 7.5 points over the undefeated number 1 team in the country.
Mm.
When you see lines like that, you say West Virginia is going to blow them out, because the logic person would say, well, wait a minute. And I still think that applies for Mac. So if let's say, God forbid, of course, on this podcast, Iona's undefeated, they're 8-0, and they're playing at Fairfield, and Fairfield's favored by 2. That's one where I'd say, because if it's off by so much that even you, as someone who knows it, you're going to start to get concerned, because they're not going to be off by that much. And in that situation, the money poured in on Baylor, poured in on the number 1 team. West Virginia won by 15 points.
So about talking about what I actually bet on and where, I will say that those who follow me on Twitter and have known me over the years know that I pick every MAC game against the spread except those games involving Iona, because always bias impacted my picks. So I used to just stop picking Iona. That said, I'm going to include Iona games this year because a few folks have said, hey, you're actually pretty objective for Iona fan. You should just do it. So I'm going to do that this year. Anyway, in my MAC odds history, I've had good years and bad years. I've always had a goal of hitting like 55%.
Yeah.
And in a given season, I've always thought that was fair. A couple of times I would beat that number. Then there are years like last year where I ended up a few games under 500. I blame COVID for that, by the way. In your experience, what's the biggest mistake bettors make?
The biggest mistake they make is recency bias. Is that if they see, it's very hard to pick something that you did not see. It's very difficult to see a team struggle in their first 2 games and then pick with them in a situation that's very difficult. But you have to remember that each of these games is a separate and its own entity. It's about the matchups. That's what it's about. I don't care if St. Peter's has lost 3 games in a row. I really don't. I care about their matchup in the next game and how I think it's going to go. So stay away from this team is hot, this team is cold, because if it was that easy, we wouldn't be that interested in sports. It's the unexpected that we love. So try to isolate the games. If a team has lost a couple times in a row, it does not mean they're due. That doesn't exist at all. People have played blackjack in the casinos. How many times got you go to, if you lost 4 or 5 hands in a row? Easily. So it's not like I've lost 3, I'm due. Every game is its own entity. A team that is flying high could come crashing down in a bad spot. And a team that is not playing well could do very well and hit a ton of threes like we saw last year early in the season with Iona. It happens. You just have to pick the right spot.
Okay. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit here, and just because you're here, and I know this is going to go off topic for some listeners, and it's too bad because my podcast. As we said in the opening, Mike covers fantasy football as well. My teams are usually struggling to sneak into the playoffs. Give me that one thing that poor fantasy owners, probably like me, do on a regular basis that hinder our own efforts.
I think there's a need to make a move. I got to make a move. If it is possible, for example, that your team has just run into a ton of bad luck. For example, look at the Chiefs this year. They have played the Chargers. They've played the Browns. They've played the Ravens. They've played the Bills. They have played basically the top teams in the AFC. So people are saying, what's wrong with Kansas City? Why are they not? Well, they've had really tough matchups. So everyone, you have to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. But I've had people offer me trades. They want to get rid of Travis Kelce. What are you doing, guys? It has to be the right situation. So don't look at the totality and look at what's happened prior before you make a rash judgment. I also believe on the flip side that if you don't think it's a good matchup, bench anyone. My phrase is I'll bench my mom in the right matchup. Like I don't necessarily say you have to start your studs. I think people, look to cliches too often to justify their actions. Well, I'm going to play him because I always start my studs. Well, if you don't think you should play, then don't start him. That's how this works.
Oh, gosh. Well, like I said, I'm a king of mediocrity in this, and I probably will remain such. But I'm going to keep following you. I'm going to keep learning, and maybe I'll actually like do something one year in this thing. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure to finally return the favor and have you on my podcast. And we're going to make this a regular thing, I think, for sure. Everyone follow Mike on Twitter at Randle Rant. He's also on Facebook. He's sharing everything that he's doing. Great information on anything you want regarding sports. It's there. Be sure to let me know if you're going to make it to any Iona games.
Yes,
because I'm at most of them, including the road ones. So if you make it, I'd love to have you at Heinz for a game, and one of New York area ones for sure. And three arena games coming up for New York for Iona.
Yes.
So hopefully we can get you to see you at a game.
Oh, I love it, man. The work you're doing is awesome. You're killing it. It's just fantastic. And listen, we love the mid-major schools. We love the small schools. And Iona has been fantastic. It's near and dear to my heart. I think you're in for a special season with your fans. So absolutely, I would love to connect at a game. It'd be great.
All right, man. Love it. Keep an eye on you. And thanks again for coming on, man. It's been great.
Anytime. You got it.
All right. Special thanks to Mike Randle for dropping by the pod this episode. You can find him in all his content on Facebook at Mike Randle, as well as on Twitter at Randle Rant. Next episode, how about some game coverage of our exhibition versus Delphi coming up on the 30th? Thanks for watching and listening. If you're watching, be sure to subscribe to this channel and like the video, and we'll catch you next time. Go Gaels.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the IonaHoops.com podcast. This podcast is a production of IonaHoops.com and its publisher Guy Filatico. The opinions shared during this podcast are those of Guy Filatico, IonaHoops.com, and any featured guests. This podcast is not affiliated with Iona College Athletics or the college itself. Thank you for supporting IonaHoops.com.